Hello, I'm Dr. Ala Kamerdiner. Welcome to Discrete-Event Simulation. This is Lecture 10, Modeling Basic Operations and Inputs in Arena. I will talk about resource schedules, states and failures, and frequencies and utilizations. So we will continue working with the model that we considered last time. So last time we studied model 4.1 from the textbook, and we modeled assembly and test system. So you can see here on the picture the graphical representation of the flow of the parts through the system. And as I mentioned last time, the system will produce two different sealed electrical units called parts A and part B. And the arriving parts, they're cast metal cases machined to accept electronic parts. So part A and part B have different prep areas, and both then go to sealer for assembly and testing, and then to shipping out if the testing shows that they're okay. Otherwise they go to rework. And after the rework is done, there's another testing that determines whether the parts are salvaged and can be shipped, or they must be scrapped. So now in this lecture we consider model 4.2 from the textbook, and that's enhanced test system. So the original model was shown to production manager, and the production manager pointed out that this is only the first shift of 2-shift day. On the second shift there are 2 operators at rework, which, as you remember in the first model, was a bottleneck station, and that instead of 24-hour days we need to be using 16-hour days. The manager also pointed out that sealer fails sometimes, so we need to introduce sealer failures with uptimes, which means operational times of a random exponential distribution with a mean 2 in hours, and repair times, the times when the sealer is broke down, and those repair times are also random. They are exponentially distributed with mean 4, and they're in minutes. And the manager also wants to buy racks to hold the rework queue. So a rack holds 10 parts, and the manager wants to know how many racks should be bought. We will run this simulation for 10 days. Each day is 16-hour day. And in this model we will introduce resource schedules, resource states, and resource failures in Arena. So we're gonna go ahead and open model 4.1 that we created last time in Arena. And before we do that, I wanted to talk about the run conditions that we have. So the run conditions, we will need to change the day. As you remember, we used to have 24 hours. We will redefine a day to be 16 hours, so we'll go to run setup replication parameters to change that. And we also will change replication length to 10 days, also in the run setup replication parameters. And after that, we're gonna start with resource schedules. So let's go ahead and open the Arena. So here I opened Arena by going start button, and then program, Rockwell software, and then Arena. So I open in Arena model 0401 from the book that we created last time during the last lecture. And now I'm gonna go ahead and save my model as model 4.2. So now I'm gonna save it as model 4.2. So after that, I'm gonna go ahead and start changing my model. So the first thing I want to do is to change the day duration. So I go run setup, and in the setup, I'm going to go to the replication parameters. I'm going to change the day, hours per day, to 16. And I will also change the replication length to 10 days from, instead of the 32 hours that we had before. We're going to change it to 10 days, and we have 16 hours per day. So the base time units will still be in minutes, so that's okay. And so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to change some resource schedules, and we actually will go to resource, and right now, as you can see, the resources are all fixed capacity. So we're gonna change the rework to a different. So notice, right, we have this. We're gonna change it from fixed capacity to based on schedule, and this is because we have two shifts with two different capacities in it. And notice what just happened, right? We just got two new columns, the schedule name and the schedule rule. So in the schedule name, I'm gonna go ahead and type in the name of the schedule. Notice right now it is highlighted because the symbol name is invalid, right? You cannot start your schedule name with a value or number, so it needs to start with a letter, right? So I'm gonna type in here, right? And let me, before I even do that, let me also show there is nothing good in the schedule, right? It's just schedule 1. So I'm gonna change this, and it will change to a proper schedule. So I'm gonna change it to rework schedule. Rework schedule. And if you look at the previous information in 4.1, we didn't have any schedules at all. So right now we introduced it by selecting based on schedule. We actually automatically introduced the schedule. So now that I changed it to from 1 to rework schedule, this yellow should now be okay. And as soon as I click off, it will in fact turn white. And so now you can see here, right, if I go to schedule, which is the data module, just as resource is a data module, the schedule is also data module. You can see now, right, it's also fine. It says rework schedule. It doesn't have anything much there, so you'll need to change it in a little bit. But right now, let me go and show you, right, that what we had is we introduced in rework, instead of fixed capacity, because capacity is going to vary, we're going to change it as based on schedule. So now we also, in resource data module, we want to select a schedule rule. So I'm going to discuss a schedule rule with you in a second. So let me go ahead and click back to the slides. So as you know, when we clicked in the resource data module and added a and changed the fixed capacity to based on schedule, we got two columns, schedule name and also schedule rule. So now regarding the schedule rule, right, we need to select appropriate schedule rules. And so it's important for you to know the differences between different schedule rules, and the schedule rule details, right, how the capacity will be decreased, right, if resource is allocated to an entity, right? Because if resource is busy, we need to know how to decrease the capacity. So there's 3 different rules that we'll talk about: the wait, ignore, and preempt. So we're going to start with talking first with the wait. And this information is very important because it will be tested on quizzes and exams, right? It's important for you to know this material. So wait is basically a schedule rule that decreases the capacity only after entity releases a resource, right? So first it waits for entity to finish processing, and then when entity releases a resource, then the capacity is decreased. And so in that case, the actual break will be reduced, and sometimes might not even be actually it will be full. It will be a full break, but it will change in terms of the duration, not duration, in terms of the starting or ending. So in the wait, we wait to take a break, and then we take the full break. But in ignore, it's gonna actually reduce our break. So with ignore rule, the capacity goes down immediately for statistical collection. So in terms of statistics collection, we see the decrease in the capacity, but the work goes on until finished, so the break is ignored partially, and so that reduces the whole duration of the break. So it counts as if the break has started, but the entities still has seized the resource and still keep the resource, keep hold of resource. It will count all the time as a break, and so it will reduce the break, maybe even not have the break at all. So it's important to realize, right, that capacity does go down immediately for statistical collection, but then, the work still goes on until finished. So it's ignoring the break, right, and so it misses out part of the break. So it starts, right, the capacity decrease starts right away, but the processing continues. And so that takes off some of the break time, and so the break is reduced. And so the third rule is actually where we don't wait and we don't ignore, but it's preemptive break. So preempt is when processing is interrupted, and the break is taken right away, and then it's resumed at the end of the break. So the processing is resumed after the break. So you get the full break, but the processing is interrupted, and so that results in a longer processing. So it's important for us to know all these differences between wait, ignore, and preempt, right? Those are the options that we have for the schedule rule. So it's important to choose the correct schedule rule in your source when you have a schedule. So now going back to our arena model, we need to select the appropriate schedule rule. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna change this from wait to ignore. So what it means is that it will decrease the capacity down immediately for statistical collection, but it will finish the work, so the processing is not interrupted, and the break starts counting as right away, but that actually reduces the actual break. So we selected the ignore here. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to go to the schedule and added the schedule, because right now we don't have any duration. So when you look at the schedule data module, you can see that we have a row already there, right, because we automatically define this rework schedule inside the resource data module. And so now, right, there's a type that says capacity, right? It automatically selected this capacity, but there is other options, and this is correct. We're not going to change capacity, but just to show, we can also have arrival or other, and we will talk about arrival schedules later in this class. And so again, you can choose whatever time units that you want, right, or prefer to use here. You can also have the scaling factor, and very importantly, you have duration. And so the duration, right, you can either double click here on the duration, and that gives you the graphical editor, and this is where we can select the specific capacity. Again, right, we can have different capacities there for the first 8 hours. Right, so I selected one for the first 8 hours, and it tells me that was capacity 1. The next one is capacity 0. Here, if I touch, it says capacity 1. So the next one is actually capacity 2. So I'm gonna go all the way through the next 8 hours till day 2. I have the capacity 2. And we only need to define it for 1 day, and then it will be repeating all the other days. So now that I do that, right, I now got these 2 rows. An alternative way, I could double click here and then enter through this, right? So when I double click on the row, right, then actually I can define this inside, right, by clicking, right, and adding, double clicking on durations at the end of the list, for example, if I wanted to add additional, and then changing the value, right, and changing the duration. Value is a capacity value, and the duration is how long, right? So it's important to see here, right, what time units we're using. And so if I make some mistake here, I can go back and add it, right, instead of the add. And again, change the capacity and change the duration here. So there's different ways to do that. So now again, right, if you want to do that, you can also right click on the row and edit via spreadsheet. That's the third way, right? So you could edit via dialog, right? That was a dialog. Or you could right click on the row and select edit via spreadsheet. So again, right, the graphical editor we can only use when we have integer durations, but this right, so the graphical for the durations, so this is a graphical editor. We can only use it when we have integer values. And again, right, the y-axis is the capacity, right, the x-axis is the time. But if I wanted to do something that is more complicated, like if I wanted to use expressions or variables, then I go and use the dialog, right? So the dialog here, I can actually go ahead and edit and actually build expressions here, or for the capacity, right, either duration or capacity, I can build expressions. And so if I wanted to, I could do something like exponential or whatever I want to do. But here we just have the integer values for the capacity. So as we talked about the schedule, right, we mentioned where we do the schedules, and how to edit it using the graphical schedule editor, right? And that's only when the time durations are integers, right? And we don't have variables or expressions. And we also talked about how to edit the schedules via dialog. And there we can actually specify variables and expressions for either capacity or duration. And also there's an alternative in terms of editing via spreadsheet again. So now the next thing that I wanted to talk about is resource failures, because as you remember, we now have some failures in this system. So when to use the failures, right, versus the schedules, because you need to understand, right, the schedules are something planned versus, you know, the failures are unplanned random downtimes. So again, schedule is a change in the capacity that is planned, right? And failures is something unplanned, often random downtimes. And we can start definition in resources or failure module. And for that, we will need to attach advanced process panel if we don't have that panel attached. So we would need to attach the panel and then create new failure. We can double click and add, right? Type in the names. So then we'll specify the uptime and the downtime. So the uptime is when the resource is operational, and the downtime is when the resource isn't working. So again, the key thing is to distinguish between the schedules versus resource failures. I will test that, so you need to make sure you understand the differences, right? The failures are something unplanned and random, while schedules are something planned that are scheduled, right? And often they're typically non-random, some values, right, or expressions that are non-random. So let me go ahead and demonstrate how to introduce the resource failures into the model. So to introduce the resource failures, I will need to attach first the advanced panel process. So in the advanced process panel, so in this case we already have basic process, we have report and navigate, but we don't have the advanced process. So we need to go in and attach a template. So it goes straight into the template folder. If you need to find it, it's on your C program files, Rockwell Software Arena template. And so among the templates, right, the templates are files with extension .tpo, so we need to find advanced process panel and we'll attach it. And so now we have the advanced process panel, and failures is a data module. So these here are the flowchart modules, and then below the spreadsheet looking things are data module. So we find the failure module here, and we're gonna double click there to add the failures. And you can we can do that right in this failure module. So we're gonna have this failure that we're gonna introduce to model our failures. So here I'm gonna add the failure called sealer failure. So let me because we have failure in the sealer resource, so I added sealer failure, and I'm gonna change this. Instead of default type count, I'm gonna change it to time. So now I have the uptime and the downtime. So the uptime is 2 hours, but I'm gonna put it in minutes. So I'm gonna change it to minutes, and 2 hours in minutes is gonna be 120. Alternatively, I could just put 2 and an hours, and then the downtime, as you remember, is 4 minutes. Actually, it's not really. It's we have to build the expression because the uptimes and downtimes are random, and they were exponentially distributed. So let me go to random distribution, and then exponential, and then a mean is going to be 120, which is 2 hours in minutes. And then the similar thing we're going to do for the downtime. So we could actually, instead of building the expression, we could also select among different distributions here already available, right? And so I could, here I'm going to do it a little differently, right? I'll just get it from this drop-down menu rather than building expression. And there I just built the expression. So here the mean is 4. Again, very important to change, right, the hours to minutes, so we have proper time units for our downtime. So again, random downtimes was exponential 120 minutes, right, or 2 hours, just like what we talked about at the very beginning of the lecture when I told you, right, about this enhanced system that we are modeling. So there we're changing the 120, and here are exponential 4 minutes. So we done with the sealer failures. Now, right, just by itself, just by adding the failures, doesn't really do much. So we need to go to basic process, right? So the failure is here an advanced process, right, that we've been changing. But now we need to go to basic process, to resources, and add the failures, right? So right now there's no failures for any of the resources, so that sealer failure would not affect our model until I go to the sealer, right? So the sealer is this third row, and I select and add the failures here. So I'll double click here and add the failures. And so I select my failures that I already introduced, sealer failure, and then I need to decide on the failure rule. And the failure rule is very similar to the rules in schedule, right? So in the schedule we had 3 different types. We had wait, we had ignore, and we had preempt. And so it's the same way as before. We have the same exact information for these schedules as we had previously for those failures as we had previously for schedules. So it's important to remember, right, what they represent. So here we're gonna actually select wait here, and in wait the capacity is gonna decrease after the entity releases the resource. So it waits for the processing to be done, and then it decreases the capacity. So it's the same thing with the failure. It will wait for the processing to be done, and then will introduce the failure after the processing. And so the downtime will be the same. It just will wait for the for processing to be finished. And alternatively, we could have ignore, right, or preempt. And ignore, in that case the capacity would go down immediately, but the processing will continue, so it would actually result in a shorter failure or downtime time. So downtime would be reduced. With the preempt, the processing would be interrupted, and then there would be the downtime, and then after the downtime the processing would be resumed. So in this case we actually have the failure rule, and so that's specified in the resource module, which is the data module in the basic process. So here's the information that reviews what we said regarding resource failures, and we also tells you how to add the resource failures to the specific resource, correct resource, and also what failure rule to choose, wait, ignore, or preempt. And so we could actually have multiple failures with separate names acting on the same resource, right? And so all we need to do is just double click there and add additional failures to the failure button on the resource row. And we can reuse defined failures for multiple resources, right? They would operate independently, right, if they involve random variables. So the next thing we want to talk about is frequencies, and this will be useful because we needed to determine how many recs we want to buy, right, to have the entities wait in the queue. So the frequencies are statistics, right, and they record time persistent occurrence frequency of variable expression or resource state, right? So we use here, right, to record percentage of time rework queue is of length either 0, more than 0, but no more than 10, and then starting with 11 parts to including 20, and so on, right? So this is will provide us information on how many racks we will need. So we again will use advanced process panel, right? As I said, it's a statistic, so there's a statistic data module in the advanced process panel, and there are 5 different types of statistics, right, of which frequencies is one. So it's important that you know the types of the statistics. So we will specify the name and the frequency type, and we'll also specify the expression, 2 racks, and to track and categorize, right, the how many racks we need. And so again, right, this expression is going to be similar like we built before, so we'll do all that and have the report labels as well. So let me go ahead and demonstrate that in Arena. So as I mentioned, we're going to introduce frequencies, and they're found in advanced process. So we already attached it, but if we needed to attach it, right, we just go here and do template attach. So here's the statistics module, right? It's the data module. So remember, we already used failure here, and we introduced failures. Right now we need to introduce statistics, so I'm gonna go ahead and double click to add new row, and that adds the statistics. So notice, as I said, there's 5 different types in Arena: time persistent, tally, counter, output, and frequency. So you need to be able to distinguish between the different types of statistics. Today we're going to talk about frequency statistics. So as soon as I do this, right now additional columns have appeared. I'm going to change the name of my statistic to rework queue statistic. Oops. Rework queue statistic, and then the frequency is the type of my statistic, and then the frequency type, there's different type of frequencies that we can be talking about: value or state. So the rework queue, right, has different values, so it's going to be a value type of frequency statistics. Because the queue, right, it's a number of the queue. For the resource, if we collected some resource statistics, it would be a state, which we'll later do that as well. So now, because it's a value, it has this expression, right, that we want to build. So I can go here and right, so again, what I do is I right click and then I do build expression, and in the build expression I'm gonna define an expression for the number of entities in the queue. So the queue is the basic process variable, so I'm going to click on my basic process variables and find the queue there, click on the queue, and then the current number in queue. And then the queue that we're interested in is the rework process queue, right? So we're going to get the rework process here. And this NQ rework process queue is the expression for the current number in the queue for the rework process queue. So now we got that. Let me show the expression so you can see the expression. And then the next thing is to decide what collection period we have. And so default is entire application, but we could also specify ourselves, right? And if we choose user specified, then we need to specify it. But we're gonna have the entire application. So notice the report label is gonna be the same as the name of the statistic, but we could change it if we wanted to. We could also specify the output file, right, and say where we want the output file to be written if we want to write the statistics in the output file. We're not going to do it here, but in the future we will be using output files. So the next thing is categories, right, because we want to know, right, we want to know, as I said, the percentage of times the rework queue is of specific length, right? Is there 0, or from 0 to 10, 10 to 20. That is necessary so that we find out how many racks we need, right? If it's always 0, right? If the reward queue is always 0, that we don't need any racks. If we have also sometimes when it's more than 0, right, but no more than 10, then we need a single rack, right? If it's sometimes it's more than that, then we need a second rack, and so on. So I'm gonna add the categories here by clicking, right? So I double clicked on categories, and this pops this this dialog. Here I can double click to add categories. Right now there are 0 rows, so I need to add additional categories. So here, right, when I start adding the categories, it also asks me constant or range. So the first one is 0, so the first category is going to be constant with value 0, and I can write the name here as 0 racks, because we will need 0 racks in this case. And then include, right, there's include or exclude, right? So in this case it's include, right? If you're not sure, right, you can do help, right? So it could be, well, let me finish with this, right? I'll add more categories later, but let me demonstrate that you could choose, you can get some help if you need to. Well, let's see, we could also do help here, arena help, and then choose, right, the statistics. Frequency, or just frequency. Let's try just frequency. So here, right, it can tell me about the frequencies. So it tells me about frequency statistics. I have some examples, and more importantly, prompts, right? So it tells me regarding the prompts, and this is where I can find out, right, what is value, what's a high value, right, whether you include or exclude, right? So an option to exclude or include category in a restricted column of the summary report, so we can include that. So we can come back to help, but for now let's go ahead and add more categories. And so the next category is not going to be constant, it's going to be range, because it's actually a range of values starting more than 0. So the first value is actually more than 0 for the range, and the high value is the maximum, so to 10, and that's going to be 1 rack. And so we can now go ahead and do a couple of more racks. So again, range, this is going to start with 0, with 10, so it's more than 10 for the range, but no more than 20, and that's going to be 2 racks. And so next thing, we're going to have another range, and then here 20, which actually means, right, for the range that's going to be more than 20, so over 20, and up to, right, including 30, so that's going to be 3 racks. And last but not least, we do one more thing here, right, one more category. So again, it's not going to start at 30, it's going to be after 30, right, more than 30, and up to 40, right, no more than 40. So that's going to be 4 racks. So now that we got all of this, right, notice we have 5 rows for the 5 categories that we can see here. So this will let us find out, right, when we run the simulation, this will allow us to find out how many racks we need. So the next thing is to do a frequency for the cellular states. So we're gonna need another frequency, and this is gonna be cellular states frequency. So it's gonna be cellular, states, and it's not a tally, it's a frequency statistic, but the frequency type is not the value because the sealer is a resource. The frequency type is going to be states, and this tells us the resource name, right? So we need the resource name here. So you could do, either build, or you could just select the resource sealer. So you're gonna check the states for the sealer resource, and it's gonna be entire application in terms of collection period, and report labels are gonna be the same as the name of statistics, and we don't need any categories here. So now we're done with the statistics. We're pretty much good to go. So let's go ahead and let's run the model. So you can see, right, this is just our model. So we could fast forward, right? So let's see the result. So again, it opens the default category overview report, right? If you look at the category overview report, there's entity information, the queue information, resources, my user specified information. So all of it is here, right? You can see, right? You can also scroll like this to see what's there, right? So you can see, right, there's more information. There's our sealer process. So when you go through, we actually do not see the frequencies, right? There's no information on the frequencies, right? So you can go through and check it yourself. There's no information on the frequencies in the category of review, but we can find the frequencies report. And if you click on frequencies, actually whatever frequencies have been defined is now, right, given here, right? Or you can click and see, right, for application 1, you can choose the rework states, right? It highlights the rework states. Or you can look at the sealer states, right? It highlights the sealer states. So now, right, how many racks do we need? You can see, right, that we only need 2 racks because 3 racks and 4 racks, right, never realized here, right? If we base it on this long realization, right, we have 10-hour days or so. So based on that, we at most need, right, we only need 2 racks. So I also want to compare the 2 models. So let's compare results of model 4.2 to the model 4.1. You notice that they're different from those of model 4.1 since there's a longer run and the modeling assumptions have also changed. So all of this actually changed the underlying random number stream, right? So it's used differently, and you can read more about this in chapter 12. The prep A and B didn't change that much, you know, other than run length and random variation. There are some differences, but they're not significant. But the sealer, if you compare, right, if you compare the sealer, the output shows that the sealer is more congested, and this is very logical, right, because we introduce sealer failures, and then rework is less congested because we have 2 shifts, and the second shift we have a higher capacity, right, 50% higher capacity. And so the frequencies report also told us, right, that the 2 racks will work all the time, so we at most need 2 racks. So again, right, what I wanted to talk more about is the utilizations, right? So there's actually 2 utilization reported for each resource, and there's instantaneous utilization and the scheduled utilization. So we need to be able to differentiate between those 2 types of utilization. So instantaneous utilization is a time average of ratio of number of units that are busy to the number of units that are scheduled. And so by definition, it counts periods when 0 units are scheduled as 0 utilization periods. But the schedule utilization is the ratio of time averages. So it's an average number busy divided by average number available. And so there's no division by zero problem, assuming there were ever any units of resource scheduled at all, right? And so when you look at the instantaneous and scheduled utilization and compare them, they're identical for fixed capacity resources. And that's what you might remember from the previous model, model 4.1, right? The instantaneous and scheduled utilizations were the same. So I'll show you in a moment, right, how there's a difference, because remember we introduced the schedule. So these instantaneous and scheduled utilizations can differ for resources in variable schedule. Right. If resource capacity varies among several different positive values, it's better to use scheduled utilization. And so you can read more about that, right? And all of this is going to be useful for your Lab 4, but let me show you what I mean when I talk about the utilization. So we go back to category overview, and I'm going to click on resources usage, and this is where I have my instantaneous utilization, right, versus the scheduled utilization. So notice, right, what we had in our model is that the rework is where we introduced the schedules. We introduced this rework schedule. And so here, notice this is your instantaneous utilization, right, which of course decreased compared to what it was, right? Remember, rework was a bottleneck, so it decreased compared to the model 4.1, which was in the 90 over 1995 or something. So here it's 86, right? But also compare this instantaneous utilization with the scheduled utilization, and you see scheduled utilization is logically smaller, right? So it makes sense, right, based on the definition. So you can see here, right, the instantaneous versus the scheduled utilization are different, but for the rest of the resources, prep A, prep B, and sealer, right, they're exactly the same. The instantaneous versus the scheduled, they're still the same for prep A, B, and the sealer, but they're different for the rework. This is rework, and this is rework, and these are different. One is 86%, the other is 85%. Alright, so again, reminder, you should by now start looking at your team report 1 and get together with the teams, decide which project you want to do. And this is going to be very useful for you in your Lab 4 and also for the quizzes.